I was involved with some organized crime and a mob enforcer for the Genovese crime family.
That you would show up early in the morning and you would catch that person off guard. So they'd come out of their house because you had already known their routine, and they see you and there you are and you're holding a cup. And as they're shocked to see you, you would ask for the money and they would say, I don't have it. And you would throw the contents of the cup, which just so happened to be not coffee. It looked like coffee,
Right.
but it was gasoline.
Correct.
And this person obviously smells the gasoline, it hits them, and you would say to them with a straight face and dead serious,
Yep. I'll come back tomorrow with the matches.
come back tomorrow with the matches.
Yeah. The mentality was that. Show strength in everything you do, physically, mentally, everything.
And this is probably your line more than my line. Everyone finds God in prison.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm like, look at these guys, they find God, they come to prison.
You thought it was weak?
Yeah, I thought it was weak. I thought they were lame, so I shied away from it. But what I did used to do is I would read about every religion.
At Landmark Church, we believe in the power of a story. Not just any story, but God's story.
A landmark is a fixed point of reference, something that stands out, guides, and tells a story. Just like physical landmarks help people navigate their journey, your story can help someone else find their way. Landmark Stories is a place where real people share their real story. Unfiltered moments from the imperfections of their past to how God transformed them into who they are today.
So, what's your landmark? Because your story isn't just about your past, it's about God's power in the present.
Little John Paladino, welcome, my brother. It is our honor to have you, one, at our church in Ocean City, New Jersey. Two, to have you back in my life. It's truly a joy. You were the one person that came to mind when we discussed what this initiative would look like. It's called Landmark Stories because we believe in the power of a testimony, the power of a story. By the time this is published, you will have already spoke at the church at our first ever Landmark Stories event. And this is more or less our first Landmark Stories sit down. This will be episode 1. In the first segment that announced all of this, we sat with one of my friends and ministry partners, Jonathan Gonzalez, and he has been instrumental in shaping this initiative. He has a powerful story. So if anyone out there is listening or watching, please check out Jonathan Gonzalez's story. It kind of sets the table for our conversation. So I'm excited, man. I can't wait to dive into what the Lord has done in your life, but here's how I want to frame it. I want you to introduce to our listeners, our audience, who you used to be, and then I want to make sure that they understand the person that you are today. Because I think there's a vast difference between the two. And that's what makes your testimony so powerful. And I've seen the way the Lord has worked in your life. So welcome to Ocean City, New Jersey.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate it. And I'm happy to be here. It's been one of the highlights of my week, anticipating coming down here to see you. After a few years of not being physically together, we still stayed in touch, and it's always been a pleasure to be in your presence, talk with you, and to exchange some of the things we're getting ready to exchange now. As far as who I used to be,
Yep.
So obviously I'm still Little John. I'm John Paladino. But in my previous life that was filled with many youthful indiscretions, I was involved with some organized crime and a mob enforcer for the Genovese crime family. So I came from a nice little Irish Catholic, Italian Catholic family. My dad was Italian, my mom was Irish and British. And I have a sister. We grew up in a nice household. We lived down in Lakewood, New Jersey. white picket fence, swimming pool in the backyard, 2 great parents that worked, and we just had a really nice, normal life. And I would think moving into my tentative years, my teenage years, my parents, unfortunately, had gotten divorced. And once they had gotten divorced, I think that sort of not knowing what it was, not being in touch with your emotions at such a young age, I don't think that you really know what's going on.
Sure.
Other than, my dad's leaving to go live in North Jersey and my mom's here with us. And we went into survival mode, basically. So my mom took us and we moved from Lakewood, New Jersey over to Belmar, New Jersey. And we were at this beautiful beach town, the ocean was down the street. The 3 of us were just living a nice, quiet life. And I found myself starting to maybe get around the wrong crowd, or not even the wrong crowd. Maybe I was the wrong crowd. You know what I mean? Like maybe I was the person who was the initiator of some of the things that transpired, but hung out with some guys when we were young, 15, 16 years old. We started drinking by the railroad tracks, smoking pot, that type of stuff. And because there was a need for money in our household, I was a pretty big kid, and I used to go down to the beach and I would mug people that were going into the nightclubs, or really coming out of the nightclubs drunk. I would, I had a whole spiel. I'd walk up and be like, hey, excuse me, you have a light? Or I'd ask them for change. And as soon as they went to reach in their pocket, I would, hit them, drag them in the bushes, rob them, just to get money, And by the way, none of these things am I proud of today in my older years, but this is, what got me here.
Right.
So I wound up hanging out with a friend of mine one night, and somebody got stabbed. And I wound up getting in trouble for that. And I was about 17, 18 years old, and it was the first time that things were going to be serious.
Wow.
It was no longer like a slap on the wrist and my mom could come get me out of jail, type of thing. Now I was facing actual prison time. So when I went to go to court for the stabbing, I wound up getting a sentence that they don't even make anymore. It was called a 5 indeterminate. And I got that sentence and I went away, went to Yardsville, spent about 1.5 years there, and then they released me to a halfway house, and I wound up getting in trouble and going back. And I just followed on that train of thought from that point forward, where I was just doing hoodlum stuff.
Right.
Like I came home, I would do other crimes, breaking into houses, mugging people, robbing things, and just not being a good person in general. But in my mind, it was more of for a need than it wasn't a hobby. You know what I mean? I needed money and we need to eat. And so these were some of the things I involved myself in. Then as I got older, I can remember coming home at like 18 years old, and I was in a halfway house in Newark. And I met this guy. I'm not going to mention his name. It's not relevant right now, but he was a big-time captain in the Genovese crime family. And he liked me, and he took a liking to me, and he sort of took me under his wing. He saw like potential in me for that lifestyle. And, he took me under his wing and started teaching me things. And then I slowly started moving into like collecting money. And if there was a problem with someone, they would send me out there to go, handle it or whatever. And so I started on that path like that. And then eventually, as I got older, I fell into a little bit more responsible roles, and eventually I became the guy's bodyguard.
Right.
And I used to travel with him and just be by his side every day, And from that point on, I had already done another prison bid, and then
Related to
some
crimes.
stuff, some criminal activity that I was involved with, some credit card scams and stuff like that, and I wound up getting in trouble for that.
So a couple questions before you
Yes.
go on. You are nicknamed Little John.
Yes.
Who then is Big John?
So that would be my dad. And at the time that name came to fruition, my dad had owned a pizzeria.
Right.
And it was called Big John's Pizza. So every time people came in, they'd be like, "Hey, Big John," and "Hey, Little John," you know. So
But you were never little.
no, and the name just stuck with me like that, you know.
That's the first thing when I say I have a friend named Little John, and they find out you're not so little.
Right.
At your prime, you were 40 pounds
Yes,
of mass
yes,
and muscle.
Yes.
And always tell people, look at John's hands because they're extra large.
yes.
And you were 6'2". So I imagine my second question, it started with smoking weed or smoking pot or drinking or mugging people, getting money so you can go do whatever. And you remember that one instance, somebody was stabbed. And we don't have to get into details about that, but it sounds like you took the fall. And that was your first prison stint, as we call it.
Yes.
In that time and transitioning to the halfway house and before you met this other individual, what was your mindset? Was it, I'm just going to get out and continue? Was there any thought about, you know what, I'm on a bad path, I better reconsider this? Take us into your mindset.
Right. So no, that was never the issue. For me, it was, I was making a career of this. Even before I was involved with the more serious stuff, I just felt like, I guess, looking at it now, like in this very moment, I guess it was one of those selfish things where you're like, I'm just going to take what I want when I want it, when I need it. And I don't care what the ramifications or the repercussions are because maybe they won't be there. So I never thought about being caught. I mean, yes, in the back of your head, you're like, I'm going to commit a crime. You have to be careful not to be caught. But I never had those thoughts of like guilt or, oh, wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't do this. I wanted to be a criminal.
Wow.
I wanted to.
It was intoxicating,
Yes.
inflicting fear or seeing, and we've shared, and we'll get to how we have an intimate relationship. So I know a lot of these inner workings. So it sounds as if, and I want everyone that's watching this to capture, you were so dedicated to making a name for yourself or imposing your presence, which is inflicting fear upon others. That became intoxicating.
Without a doubt.
And you had no fear of consequences.
That's absolutely correct.
So did you see along the way that your criminality was like progressing? Like you were either getting better at it, but it was taking you deeper into eventually organized crime.
Yes. I couldn't have worded it any better than you have, Matt, but that's exactly what happened. It's one of those things where it's almost like being an addict for drugs. So you start to, do the things you're doing, committing the crimes, then you're not getting caught for them. Then you start to build a confidence in that, and that starts to evolve maybe into bigger things, into things that maybe you thought weren't possible for you in that criminal element. But for me, exactly what you just said, it was one of those things. I was building my reputation.
Right.
And I was building that reputation on my criminality and how tough I could be. Like I always wanted to be the toughest kid in my town, and I was, you know what I mean? Like,
So take me to that reputation. And I know we've spoken off camera there's a fine line between talking about our pasts, right? And making sure we don't glory
yes,
in some of those missteps and mistakes and quite frankly, sinful behaviors.
yes,
While at the same time, bringing people into who you used to be. That's how I wanted to set this up. Who did you used to be? So we don't glory in it as you talk through. Your reputation, however, preceded you. There was a very real fear in your community based on how effective you were
yes,
at the task at hand, which quite often included going to collect monies or going to collect a debt that was owed. And if somebody doesn't pay a debt, how do you get them to pay the debt? Talk us through that reputation.
Right. So wanting to build that reputation and working on that like diligently,
Right.
I achieved it because when I did go around, I did get that respect from people that I thought was something that mattered. I thought that having that type of reputation was a good thing.
You wore it as a badge.
As a badge this big, like I wore it as a badge, yes. And, thinking back now, saying to myself, like, there's so many things I could have done differently in my life or dealt with different situations. But, I didn't. And here we are today. But a lot of those things that I did in the past, some of them weren't about money. Some of them were, the money wasn't an issue anymore. Now it was a matter of, there was a point that had to be proven or an example that had to be set so that future people would toe the line if they, saw what the repercussions would be.
John, you were a bad person.
Yes.
And I don't say that as a form of judgment. I say that because you won't say it, that one of the ways that you would go and collect money if you knew the person was going to be giving the family a problem, and you shared this with me, and when I heard you share that, when you shared it with me in a very intimate setting, you weren't bragging about it, you were just explaining, and it was more a sense of remorse, like, but this is what I was so deeply involved in that you would show up early in the morning and you would catch that person off guard. So they'd come out of their house because you had already known their routine, and they see you, and there you are, and you're holding a cup.
Mm.
And as they're shocked to see you, you would ask for the money, and they would say, I don't have it. And you would throw the contents of the cup, which just so happened to be not coffee. It looked like coffee,
Right.
but it was gasoline.
Correct.
And this person obviously smells the gasoline. It hits them. And you would say to them with a straight face and dead serious,
Yep. I'll come back tomorrow with the matches.
come back tomorrow with the matches.
Yeah.
That's like insane.
Yeah.
Right? So when most people hear that, but that's how deep in you were. These are the movies that I grew up watching, right? Mafioso, Mafia, The Godfather, Scarface, and the criminality was glorified.
Mm-hmm.
And you watch it and you want to be it.
Yes.
And you lived it. And now you're connected with somebody who kind of takes you deeper into the family mechanism. And now you're a bodyguard. You are a enforcer, a bodyguard. You're also wearing multiple hats. You're doing the tasks asked of you.
Without a doubt.
Now you're caught up in another criminal scheme. You became, it sounds as if, a prized possession within that world because of your effectiveness
Yes.
at getting people paid.
Yeah. I always came back with money. Always. And one of my tactics, like you just mentioned, was the gas in the cup and my little spiel about, I'll come back tomorrow with the matches. I wouldn't even have to wait till tomorrow. Within like 2 hours, they'd be calling me.
You were in your late 20s.
Yeah. Yep. My late 20s.
You're in pretty good physical shape.
Yes.
You're an imposing
beast.
figure.
Yes.
So you get caught up in another scheme and you're looking at additional charges. How much time?
More time, another 7 years.
7 years. Just you're taking it on the chin.
Yep.
Now you're in one of the institutions in New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
And take us into your mindset, your mentality as inmate.
Right.
And do you remember your? That is the dumbest question in the world, actually.
My number?
You know your numbers.
Yeah, I've had several numbers.
Yeah. Me
So
too.
at the time, that number was 311068.
Yeah, you'll never forget it.
No, I use some of those numbers still to this day.
So do I.
Bank codes.
Yeah, don't tell people that.
Cut that out of this. No, but it's funny how you can remember numbers, man, like that. Even today, I can't remember phone numbers because we have these stupid phones, but I can remember 5 prison numbers that I've had,
So
over
now
the
you're a
years.
number. You're an identity.
Yes.
You are now inmate so-and-so.
Yep.
What are you thinking during that time period, that 7 years? You are now behind the wall, which is not a place that a lot of people can relate to.
Mm-hmm.
People are attracted to it.
Mm-hmm.
They want to know what happened behind the wall. There's an enigma. There's an unknown. And unless you've experienced it, isolation, it could do one of several things. It could destroy a man, right? Even the strongest person in the world. They say, and my joke was always, I could do my time with my standing on my head. And I'm like, yeah, then all the blood will rush to your brain and that makes you brain dead. And then you go out, recommit a crime, and now you're back. How effective was that? But there was that mentality that like, man, I don't care what comes my way. I can do this time. Then there was perhaps where you fit in, I'm just going to figure out a better way to be a better criminal.
Right. And that was my mindset. But let me just digress real quick, because prior to the 7, in between when I first went away as a youth, I had a 10-year stint in between where I was in raw way and all that stuff. And that was for something else. That was for collecting money. I put a guy in the hospital. I had a pistol. So all those charges had accumulated to a 10-year sentence that I did in raw way. Actually, I started out down in the South Jersey in Southwoods, and then I had an altercation with some officers. We wound up fighting, and I put an officer in the hospital. You know, they beat me up, and I went to ADSEG, you know, the whole for like 13 months.
Which likely only strengthened your reputation.
That's all it did.
Of fear.
Mm-hmm. The unpredictability of, you know, a person
Little
in jail,
Paladino.
right? Myself. And it's almost something that you do. I don't know, like, I could remember doing crazy, stupid stuff in prison, just wanting them to think that I was crazy even. You know, like when you'd walk around maybe mumbling to yourself, or you'd go down to the medical unit. And I used to always do this. I would constantly walk back and forth. But because I was so big, everybody would be like, yo, get out of this guy's way. Like, move out of his way. So I would just take over like the whole medical waiting room, just walking back and forth, mumbling like, you know what I mean? Like acting nuts. But all of it was a show. You know, you're there, and in my mind, you can't show weakness. So you have to show strength. So the best way that you show strength is you work out, you don't take no nonsense from anybody. You do what you have to do in order to retain that reputation, especially there.
No shut off. You can't shut that off.
No.
You're constantly
in prison mode.
You're in prison mode, which most people have no idea what that means.
So
I do.
It means this: forget about everything that has to do with the street and focus on your time and what you're doing there and your safety, and that's that.
Wow.
You can't be involved with worrying about what your girlfriend's doing. Is anybody okay? What your mom or dad are doing.
You got no control over that.
You have no control over any of those things, number one. But number two, they take away from you protecting yourself while you're there. And if
There's a real sense of self-preservation.
Yes.
And people manage that differently. Some people stay to themselves, as you said. Some people kind of lash out to create their own boundaries. Some people get into fights to show people I'm not going to tolerate it. I mean, there's a million different ways.
Yep.
Sounds like you were taking the route of I'm going to be the biggest guy, and if there's somebody bigger, then prove it.
That's how I felt, you know, well, especially in my youth when I was physically capable and I was, you know, in my 20s or 30s, because I spent all of my 30s in prison. I never saw the streets in my 30s at all. But yeah, the mentality was that. Show strength in everything you do, physically, mentally, everything.
Here's a question for you.
Sir.
Where did religion fit in?
Okay.
What was Little John Paladino's religious experience growing up and then even in prison? How did you view religion? I'm using that as a very general statement.
I understand.
Take us there.
Okay, so as a youth, we were more holiday Catholics.
Sure.
We went to church on the holidays, and there was sporadic times, I guess, when, looking back now, I guess when my parents were having maybe their issues, that they turned to what they knew best, and that was the church.
Sure.
And we would start going to church, but then it would fall off, and we would just go on the holidays and such like that. But then, so my experience really was, the most I ever went to church was when I had a crush on a girl. And I started going to the church. So I'd make my mom drop me off every Sunday morning to go to church because I wanted to see this girl so bad.
You're such a creep.
Right. And I mean, but still, we were like 15.
Yeah, no, I get it. I'm messing.
And so I'd be sitting there just seeing her, and whatever she did, I would do. So if she got up and went and walked up for like, you know, communion or whatever, I'd get up and go walk for communion just so I could be like behind her, say hi.
Right.
And then I started going to like the youth thing because she belonged to that. And I guess that lasted for maybe about a year and a half. And then
no interest in God though. Not really. That was not a thought.
No.
Yeah.
I didn't really have any interest in that. And for whatever I did know of it, it wasn't like I was practicing it.
Yep. Yep.
So, after I had gotten a little older from that and I started doing my first bids, I noticed that was a thing in prison where guys would come into prison and then what they would do is they would hook up with whatever religious affiliation they felt comfortable with, and then they would walk in that path. But only like that path for those moments.
So you're seeing that. It's obviously a terrible impression.
Right.
You're already thinking, and this is probably your line more than my line, everyone finds God in prison.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm like, look at these guys, they find God, they come to prison.
You thought it was weak?
They're doing. Yeah, I thought it was weak. I thought they were lame, so I shied away from it. But what I did used to do is I would read about every religion because I wanted to have information so that I could debate people and argue with them about what they believed in. And I would try to be like, well, my grandmother says, like a nudge. Like I try to be like a thorn in their side. Like, oh yeah, you're religious, huh? Yeah, you do this. And then I would come at them with something or, just try to make an argument.
It was more to belittle them, destroy their idea behind
Correct.
what they were following.
Absolutely.
You despised it in a sense that it made,
right.
It was something people hid behind.
Correct. And listen, let's not get it wrong. It wasn't like I was a devil worshiper or anything.
No.
I definitely had what I know now to be reverence for God, because I can think back at times when, even though I didn't believe or didn't want anything to do with it, I still had like this respect for it. Like I grew up with Jesus on the wall in my grandmother's house. She had a drawing, a painting of Jesus, and next to Jesus was JFK. That's what they believed in, growing up. So I had a reverence for it. Like one thing I never was big on or never did, whether I believed or not, using the Lord's name in vain.
Yeah.
I just always found that to be so like disrespectful.
You know what? There was a lot of people that similarly in prison weren't religious, weren't practicing, but if a Bible was on the ground,
They'd pick it up.
they'd pick it up. So there was this esteem, and I think this is what the Lord used ultimately. So you were surrounded by it, weren't interested in it. A girl brought you to it, but that was a season. You see the worst side of it in jail, people that found God, right? But then they're hypocritical, which as a pastor now means they're a mask wearer. They put on masks. They were fitting in. So it was no different than conforming to the world around them when they were on the street. Now they're in prison, and your line may have been, you want to find God in prison? Where was he when you were ripping and running?
That's exactly right.
So,
or where were your thoughts for him when you were ripping and running?
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like,
right.
How do you find something that you know you need only in the moment of your adversity?
Right. Right.
Why isn't it there in the moments of your happiness or the moments of goodness? And knowing what I know today, that's possible.
Yeah, the possibility is that God can reach anyone from anywhere who's done anything in any season. So somebody that may have found God, he can reach them where they're at, meet them, and then reorient them. And I think that's where who you are today is so powerful, because you were in and out of prison. You spent, at the time, half of your young life in some form of institution, federal or state, parole or probation. You never knew what it was like to be crime-free and not have to look over your shoulders. And by the way, if you got locked up, there was no fear there either. A lot of people, that's a very real fear, going into the unknown, and they don't come out on the other side because it devours them. You never really worried about that. It was like, you're going to go in, you're going to dominate, you're going to make some friends along the way, you're going to figure out better ways to do more crime, and you'll get out and repeat the cycle.
Right.
So take us there. I just kind of touched on it.
It's almost like you're going to prison to network. You're going there, you're going to be there. So what are you going to do while you're there? So the best things you can do is you want to be physically in shape. You want to try to be mentally in shape. And then didn't mean have anything to do with the Bible. It meant to have your wherewithal. It meant to have the connections to maybe go home and do some crimes that you could potentially make some good money at.
What was the number one read book behind the wall?
The number one of what? The 48 Laws of Power?
48 Laws of Power. You remember that?
Yeah, sure I do. I know the book well.
And it teaches
People how to manipulate. And
how to take advantage.
Yeah.
And that was a choice read for many minds.
Without a doubt. You know, they ban that book in most prisons now.
Wow.
Where they don't even want you to read that information because, you know, some guys use that to their advantage.
As you just said. So we can probably spend so much time talking about those seasons of your life, in and out. They all really have the same common denominator. You may have heard me say this before, that when we are living for self, full of self, we're filled with pride and every ungodly thing, sin at its core, which simply means missing the mark. There's a mark that, like a bullseye, is the standard, and everyone has fallen short of that standard. Like a archer shooting an arrow, whether you miss the bullseye by a centimeter or you miss it by a mile, you've missed the mark.
Right.
So we know sin is sin. Sin, for me and you, took us further than we ever wanted to stray. It kept us longer than we ever wanted to stay. And it cost us more than we ever wanted to pay. So you're living in that mentality. How, I guess I'm going to ask a question I know the answer to. How in the world did we meet?
Right. So,
So most people out there might be listening know me as Pastor Matt.
Right.
Many know my testimony. There's people that are going to watch this that don't have any clue who I am.
yeah.
I played professional soccer. I was raised in a strong Christian household. So I knew all this. I knew better. I didn't do better. I unfortunately had a career-ending injury, drank, drove, crashed. It resulted in the death of a man named Hort Cap. That radically humiliated my life. I say humiliation because that's what God used to break me. And everything that I thought was my identity came crashing down. And by God's grace, the family, Mr. Hort Cap's family, forgave me. I stood before a judge on January 7, 2010, and Mr. Hort Cap's son, Noon, gave me a hug of forgiveness, and that set me free. So I get locked up for the next 5 years of my life on January 7th, 2010, John. But I'm a man on fire for the Lord. So I'm not looking at prison as, I knew it was consequential. I knew it was going to be hard, but I was so at peace. First time in my life that the religion that I was raised in became real and a relationship was birthed. So I'm in jail and I'm studying the scriptures and I'm trying to do my best to influence the people around me. Long story short, I moved from one housing unit, Unit 2, to Unit 7. And that's a whole different episode and podcast we'll get to another time. And I get moved upstairs. And on day one, it's 6 a.m. 6 a.m. was the time that what happened at 6 a.m. every day.
Oh, to mess out.
The lights would come on.
Yeah, lights go on.
Lights
wash
on,
up, you're ready for
everyone-
mess.
Lights come on, and there's two guys fighting on my bed. What are they fighting over? Chess pieces. Where are the chess pieces to the chessboard? So I'm waking up, and two guys are fighting, and one guy was a gang member, so the gang guys got involved, and they jumped this guy. He just so happened to be my neighbor. So count up. Guard comes down, sees he's got lumps all over his face. They call code. Code what?
Code 33.
Code 33. They shut it down. They make us all strip. They check everybody's knuckles, any body marks, any scratches, who's involved. They find out the guy that got lumped up and somebody else. They take him off. This bed next to mine is vacant.
21. You were in 19. I was in 21.
The bed number was 21. I was in 19. And Monday comes around. I'm wondering who's going to be my new space mate, neighbor. Remember, it was a dormitory setting, no dividing walls, like a military barracks. So it mattered who was going to be sleeping less than 3 yards away from you.
Not even 3 yards, 3 feet.
Yeah. Monday, nobody fills the bed. I asked the guard, what's up with that? Never have we ever seen a bed stay open for more than a day. Tuesday, bed stays open, John. Nobody has any clue why they're not filling the bed. Wednesday comes, 3 days. I'm at the front of the housing unit. I'm reading or writing. That was what I did. And here comes this guy. And I remember seeing him. And obviously, you're in self-preservation mode. You're vigilant, who's who, and here you come. And you come strutting onto the housing unit. You probably have no idea. And I'm thinking, look at this joker. And as soon as you walk in the housing unit, you begin to hear people saying, oh, snap, that's Little John. And then older inmates are coming over to you. Do you remember what you did?
With the first date?
Do you remember? So take us through. You're now locked back up. You're in central reception. You're waiting to go probably back to Rawway or some place that you've been before, done hard time. How in the world did you end up at Mid-State?
Right. So what happens is once you get arrested, you're in the county jail. When you get released from the county to go to prison, you get sent to a place called CRAF. And it's like a holdover until they can figure out where they're going to send you. So while you're in CRAF, you'll see what's called classification. So I go to see classification, and the first thing, they're sitting there. Now, they all know me from over the years. So they're like,
You're back.
What are you doing? You're back. And my file's sitting there, and it's like this thick. And they're just like, what are we going to do with you? And I'm like, send me back to Rawway. And they're like, we can't send you to Rawway because they're taking people with 10 years or more. You only got 7. So where do you want to go? And I said, well, I want to stay somewhere close to home because of my family. So how about like Northern State? I said, we don't have nothing in Northern State.
No beds.
No beds, no nothing. They said, how about Mid-State? And I said, I ain't going to Mid-State. And they're like, what do you mean? I said, listen to me. You guys already know what Mid-State is. It's filled with rats and pedophiles, and I ain't going there.
Right.
So they're like, wait a minute. Like, there's an upstairs to Mid-State that is more like guys like yourself, almost like a retirement home for convicts, So they said, no, listen, if we send you there, you only got like 22 months to do. Do you think you could just go there and just do it?
Mind your business.
Yeah, just mind your business. So they said, just take 5 minutes to think about it. So I said, all right. I said, I'll go. And I promise, like, I won't do nothing, to nobody or nothing. You know what I mean? So they're like, all right. So they send me to over there. And even when I get there, they come off the bus. Some of the cops know me. Now, remember, I've been growing up in the system. So some of these officers are now lieutenants and captains. They're running, stuff. So when I get there, they pull me off the bus. And while they're processing everybody, they pull me on the side. And they ask me, like, blatantly, like, look, man, you going to be all right to be here? And I'm like, yeah, I'll be all right. They're like, are you sure? We don't want no trouble. We don't want no problems. We don't need you doing something to somebody and when we can avoid it. And I said, no, I'm good. I only got 22 months. I'll be on my best behavior. Dang. Right? So then I come in and they send me upstairs.
7 East.
Yep. And then when I go up, it would always be my my thing where if you're going to go on a unit, I want to see the whole unit.
Yeah, you do.
So I walk all the way to the end, just to get a lay of the land. But like you said, guys are coming up to me, yo, what's up, Little John, blah, 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 bringing me stuff, here's some stuff, get you set up, some soups or whatever they have, some cosmetics. And then I come, by the bed over by 21.
Listen, I'd only been up there a few days, but it doesn't take long to see who's who and what really dictated the culture of the unit and what ultimately started a lot of fights within those short few days was the TV. And it was a young gang guy that had the remote at the time where they were giving the remote to one inmate. They didn't do that after this, and these guys would watch the same stuff every day. And if you touch the TV, what was the saying? What's our saying about the TV?
No, Tom, remind me.
Oh, we've never seen the TV lose a fight.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
But the guys would fight over what channel to watch.
Yep.
And John, you walked onto the unit. You did walk the length of the unit. And what made it weird was I turned around to see what you were going to do, and you threw your mesh bag into the bunk area. You walked to the back. People were saying hi to you, but then you walked right up to the TV. And at that moment, I'm like, if there was popcorn to be had, I would have been like this, because I'm like, yo, this is about to go down. But the gang guys, everyone expected them to say something because that's what they did. And you sat down in our green chair. Everyone had one green chair.
Yes.
You put on a certain station that you say you forget about. I'm like, I didn't forget this.
Yeah.
You sat down and I watched, and nobody said a word. They all sat there and watched. You know what you put on the TV? Animal Planet.
Yes, my favorite.
And they just sat there and watched. I remember going, what the heck just happened? And then you start to hear your reputation preceded you. Guards were talking about who you were. Inmates were talking about who you were. And now you're my neighbor. Now, I don't know what your impression was of me. I do remember your first question to me was, what did you do to get here? And I shared parts of my story. And that was the beginning of what God was up to. We had no idea, or at least I didn't, and I'm certain you didn't, what was going to happen next in the next several months and years as they unfolded. So talk freely about your arrival, because you shouldn't have been in that bed. You didn't want to be there.
Nope.
That bed should not have been open for those 3 or 4 days after the fight.
Yep.
And here you come. I'm a big believer in God's providence,
God's placement.
God's placement. And he had a divine appointment. Not to mention, I was downstairs the week before with former NBA All-Star Jason Williams, and based on a guard or a sergeant who didn't really like us, tried to get us in trouble. They chose me, not Jay, because he had an extended bed. He's 6'11", and here I am making my way upstairs to where they would put some of the more rough inmates and the gang guys. And I'm thinking about what the guard told me when I first got there. Hey, you're on a good unit. If you ever find yourself moved off this unit or upstairs, you've done something terribly wrong. So here I am with 18 months worth of stuff, feeling like I'm starting all over. I get upstairs, the dorm's filled with smoke, chaos, arguing. I woke up the next day to a fight on my bed. And then here you come walking on and you start to take over. What are you thinking? Take us to that place in your life, because I think this is where we pivot.
Right. So I remember, man, just like it was yesterday. I came in, I remember meeting you. I remember looking at you going, look at this guy, like you look like so innocent, man, like just young white kid, and it's like, I'm just saying, the prisons unfortunately are filled with, a lot of black guys, Spanish guys. To see another fellow white guy, it's, we're the minority. So when I seen Matt, I'm just like, look at this kid, man.
You thought they were going to eat me alive.
Yeah, I'm just like, man, I don't know what this kid did, but he doesn't look like he belongs here at all. So we exchanged some pleasantries.
Thank you, by the way.
You're welcome. Even though they used to call him Matt the Ice Pick. But no, seriously, like I'm just like, what could this kid have done? That's why what prompted me. Plus, it's just something I always ask people because I don't want to be around certain people.
Sure.
So I'm like, what'd you do? What are you here for? I was hoping it wasn't going to be something bad.
Yep.
And then I just remember like, us slowly but surely forming this bond, And I still see it like it was yesterday. You always would sit at your bunk, you'd have your Bible open or the word one of the two things would be in front of you every day. The word processor or your Bible. And I just remember sitting there talking to you, a little bit at first. And then as we became closer, we started to divulge more to one another. But the thing that really was like so good for me was that you never, ever were like an overzealous person to push like God on me or religion. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It was always through like little stories, little fables or anecdotes. And I'm just like, wow, that's interesting. I remember the first Bible studies and everything, bro. Like you just came up, you wanted to start a Bible study. There'd be like 3 people sitting with you. And I said, I'll come sit, man, just to, add some, structure, not structure, but add population to the group. There was 40 people on that unit.
Yeah, 38.
38 people on the unit, and like 3 people would be sitting with you doing the Bible study.
Yep.
And
but there was a time when I would get done the study, because I would do it in a common place so everyone could hear.
Yep.
and you would ask questions. I would come back to the bunk and you would say, hey, that story you told today, whether it was about an eagle shedding its feathers, or
That's a good one.
you would say, that's pretty cool. And then I would tie it into something in the scripture. And like, I could tell that you were at least learning, and I didn't know why you were processing it, but you were willing to learn. And I kept at it. I wanted people to come to that study. And I remember the day you came, the first time you came, in my mind, I'm like, yeah, he's coming. But you had a different mentality. You were like, why did you come?
I was coming at first just to show solidarity for, you and the group, what you wanted to do, because I liked you. From the minute I met you, I just had a liking, for you. You know what I mean? Like, I just felt like maybe you could have been my son or something. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to show that solidarity to add, to your group and show support. And then, like you say, man, little by little, that word, as you hear it starts to sneak into your life.
Yes.
So it's almost like, in the course of your day, if you're walking around and you're picking at little food, and then by the end of the day, you're full. So the words that you kept saying and all the little stories started, accumulating. And then eventually I, started getting into the word a little bit, reading some stuff, but that took a little more time.
Well, it took time. It was more or less you coming to the study. The study began to grow, right? 3 guys, 5 guys, 8 guys, 10 guys, 20 guys, then back down to 10 guys. And like, we were just consistent every day. By God's grace, I didn't know what I was doing. I just was studying to show myself approved, and then teaching and trying to make it relatable. As the Apostle Paul said, he became all things to all men so that he might save the more, right? And I remember thinking from my past, one, the way that people viewed me, he's the former pro soccer player. There was an attraction to that. There was, they would put me on the same platform as like a David Beckham. They didn't really care to correct them other than to leverage what God had allowed me to be blessed with and using that to share truth. And as you said, little sound bites along the way from the word of God. And I remember asking you multiple times, hey, come to church. You were very reluctant. You didn't want to leave the unit because it competed with what? Do you remember?
No.
The gym.
Oh, working out, yeah.
Working out.
Going to the gym at night and all that.
But the first day you came, I remember you finally were willing to take a walk with me.
No, I remember that day.
To leave the housing unit, to go to the gym, the other gym where they allowed us to do church.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember
that little old man that came in there?
Let's talk about it.
No, so like you said, you had invited me multiple times, and every time I either had an excuse or wanted to go to the gym or whatever. And I remember this night, you were like, come on down, man, just get off the unit. And I was like, you know what? I'll take a walk with you. So we go down to the gym. Gym is set up like a church, like you say. And they had a special speaker come in that day. I forget the guy's name.
I do too.
But he was a little old guy.
Yeah.
I remember I could see his face right now with gray hair.
Yeah.
He had a couple of them old tattoos, like an old sailor.
Yes.
And he was just up there telling his story. And he was so vibrant and just filled with like the spirit, what I know now to be the spirit. Then I didn't know what was going on. I said, this guy must be drunk or something,
Right.
But he was very animated,
He was free.
Yes, he was so filled with like happiness and just wanting to share his story, And I can remember, well, I'm not going to jump forward yet, but I remember coming back to the unit that night, and I had this kid with me, Vinny.
I remember Vinny.
I had brought him to church with me that night. I said, yo, take a walk. And when we went back, they were still smoking cigarettes. They still had cigarettes. And we sat at the table. You had went and laid down. It was after they shut the lights out. And we were just sitting there talking. And I remember it was summer because the big fan was on. And he starts asking me like, and we were using profanity and stuff. He's like, you believe this, bull crap, whatever.
You had a very strong tongue, John, when I met you.
Uh-huh.
But you were very conscious of that around me, which showed me that you had a respect for me.
Yeah.
I never really wanted to confront you and say, hey, man, you just kind of were respectful when we were dealing with either the Bible. I didn't know the Lord was doing anything in your heart. You probably didn't know at the level he was, but you have this conversation with Vinny.
Mm-hmm.
And
so during the conversation, he's like, you believe this bull crap or whatever? And I'm like, I can remember saying all of this like verbatim. I'm like, dude, what do I know? I says, I don't know nothing, man. I says, I would know, like, if God did something, like, say he moved this ashtray across the table.
there's a peanut butter lid.
Yep, for an ashtray.
Yep.
I told Vinny, I said, now, maybe if God you moved the ashtray across the table, maybe I would believe. I says, but I'd probably make an excuse and say the fan pushed it.
Right.
I said, so what do I know, bro? Blah, blah. We went about our business. We went to bed. Then the next day was the day you had your legal call for mail.
It was Memorial Day of all days. That's why I know the date in 2011. And we would meet at the same time every day to do the Bible study.
Right, that front table in the front.
And right before the Bible study is about to kick off, I get called for legal mail, which means
you have to go downstairs and get your mail.
And nobody's going to run the group.
Right. And you said, do me a favor.
I turned to you.
Read this Daily Bread. Just open up.
Just was a random Daily Bread. We weren't even using the Daily Bread.
Right.
That was the funniest part about this, is that I knew there was a date. You joked with me. Do you remember what you said?
No.
You said, I can read, I can do it,
Yeah.
right? Your typical humor. And here's what you probably don't know. You probably know because we've told this story before, but when I walked out into the hallway, a guard had grabbed my legal mail. We know that is not allowed to happen. It has to be signed off. It's very, well, he did it and he brought it to me. He goes, here you go. I went out of my way to get it for you. So I'm like, oh, cool. I take it back to the unit. I'm back in timely fashion. The group hadn't really kicked off yet. You looked at me and said, go ahead, take it. I'm like, no, you got it. So then we all sit down. It's the
day the biggest people come. Like everybody in the whole unit shows up. I'm like, what the heck is going on?
There's like 30 guys, and you're leading the Bible study.
I remember it all, bro. So I can remember, man, like it's yesterday. I open up the Daily Bread. I'm like, good morning, guys. How's everybody doing? I'm like, wow, look at all these people, man. Like usually it's like 5 or 6 guys, like half the unit more that showed up. So I'm like, all right. I start to go to read the Daily Bread. I'm like, look, today's this date. I don't remember what it said. I just remember starting to read the words, and all of a sudden, I start feeling like, I don't even know how to describe it, but I felt like this, not a sadness, but just an emotion that was like a wave overcoming me.
Right.
So I'm like, I'm in my head, I'm having this conversation like, yo, you better not cry in front of these guys.
You felt like you were about to.
I felt like I was getting choked up.
For no reason.
For no reason. I just started reading the Bible. Reading the Daily Bread. So as I start to read it, I start to feel that choked up feeling. I'm like, hey guys, excuse me for a second. I said, I got to just use the bathroom real quick.
And you did.
I said, it must have been something we ate for lunch. So I go in the bathroom. I start throwing water on my face. I look in the mirror. I'm like, you better not cry in front of these guys. I start throwing some punches like I'm shadow boxing.
You didn't say the joke thing about lunch until you came back. Because you walk away, everyone knows something just happened. We can't figure out what it is.
Right.
They're all looking at me like, what the heck's happening? I'm like, I don't know. Nobody move. Nobody move. You come back and the first thing you say is,
that's what I said.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
It must have been the hot dogs at lunch.
Right.
Everyone uncomfortably laughs.
Yeah.
You sit back down and you say this, where was I?
And I only could read one word. I go to reread the Daily Bread. I read literally like one word, and a flood of emotions overtakes me.
You lost it.
And I'd start sobbing.
Like a baby.
Like a little baby. But not sad sobbing.
Right.
And I can remember exactly what I said. I like look around, I'm like I just want what that old man had last night.
Yeah.
Like I want to have the feeling of that I can fall backwards and somebody's going to catch me, and that somebody is Jesus.
Yes.
So then I look over at Matt. Now, as soon as I made that confirmation, I stopped crying, and I'm like totally like,
what the heck just happened?
I'm like, yo, that was crazy, huh?
You kept saying that.
I kept saying that was crazy, and Matt's like, yo, that's the Holy Spirit, man. The Holy Spirit just like came over you.
Yep.
And I was like, dude, I don't know what happened. I just know this. That was crazy. I'm like, that was crazy, right?
All day you kept asking.
All I kept saying, I kept walking. I'm like, yo, that was crazy, right?
Because you couldn't explain it, right? Because though it was emotional, it was wholly spiritual.
But I'll tell you this much: I felt cleansed.
You kept saying that.
And clean from the inside.
You kept saying to me, it feels like somebody washed me with a bar of soap. And
Yeah,
you kept asking me. You kept saying 3 things. That was crazy, right? What was that? I feel clean.
Yeah.
And I kept explaining to you,
Yeah.
because I watched kind of the Lord nudge you in certain directions. I saw that there was an interest. I didn't know what he was doing in your heart. I think the beautiful thing about you, John, was you were open. The moment that there was a respect between us, a trust. You were very open. You allowed me to speak into your life. You allowed me to course correct you if you were saying something you shouldn't have said. And on that day, as only God would ordain it, that you would, and people have asked, what did the Daily Bread say? I have no idea.
Yeah.
That wasn't the point.
We never got
now I
to
can
it.
find one from 2011, Daily
Right.
Bread, May, whatever date it was, Memorial Day.
Yeah.
But it was about this moment where you are crying in front of all types of people, because prior to that, nobody saw you cry,
Nope,
because that's a sign of weakness.
without a doubt.
And now you're crying openly in front of gang members and peers,
Mm-hmm.
and you were unashamed, but you also wanted to know, what was that?
Yeah.
And you knew that the Spirit of God was kind of drawing you unto himself. So all day we're going back and forth. You're asking me these questions. I'm trying to explain to you. You made a confession of faith, because I said it's in Jesus alone that your sins are forgiven and the Spirit has just cleansed you out. We talked about repentance. We talked about all these theological terms that came to life for you for the first time. Do you remember how everything else unfolded?
Yeah. So I remember that night, I remember going to bed, we're laying down, lights.
You confessed to me earlier that you and Vinny had this conversation out front of my bed.
Right.
And you were saying to me, almost like a child confessing to a father,
Yeah.
hey, that's all right, right? I was kind of like just tempting God. Like he doesn't move.
Right. Magic tricks.
Yeah, he doesn't do magic tricks. He wouldn't move an ashtray. And I'm like, no, John, he doesn't work that way.
Right.
And now we go to bed.
We go to bed, and then I don't know what time it was. Maybe an hour went by or so.
I was about to fade, bro.
Yep, you're like in your bed, but because we were so close, I could literally reach over and like touch your bed.
Yep.
And I remember like sitting straight up, like
Yep.
what's the guy, the wrestler, the grave digger or whatever. I'll sit straight up, and I'm like, yo, I hit the bed. I'm like, Matt, I'm like, that was God moving my ashtray.
I'll never forget it.
Yep.
I'll never forget it, because you did grab me. Yo, homeboy, wake up. I kind of pop up. I'm like, what's up? And you were with wide-eyed wonder
Yep.
to connect those dots. This is the point. For you to connect those dots can be nothing less than the Spirit of God giving what we call revelation. Why? Because you had, in a way, provoked, if God is real, move this ashtray and I'll
Prove
believe.
it to me, right?
And even if he chose to do that, I would explain it away.
Correct.
And then we have this unbelievable experience. We make our way through the day. You're processing it. We go to bed. You pop up. Homeboy,
Yep.
you looked at me, John. You pointed to your heart
Because I felt like God touched my heart.
and you said, that was God moving my ashtray.
Yep.
And I'll never forget it, because I don't know if you understood. The heart of man is desperately wicked and deceitful. That's why we cannot trust ourselves. And the heart is full of sin. And there was something in your heart that longed for cleansing and forgiveness from everything you've been through and done. However the Lord used that old preacher, how he used my life, you opened yourself up. He was knocking. The Spirit comes upon you. You feel cleansed. You confess faith in Jesus Christ alone. And then at the end of the day, it was like the Lord giving you this sweet cherry to this amazing cake.
Yep.
And you knew that your heart was the ashtray, because you can't explain that away, John.
No.
And for the rest of your life, and from that day forward, I saw a radically changed man.
Oh, yeah.
The first thing you changed was literally how you spoke.
Mm-hmm.
You went out of your way to make sure that what you spoke were words of life. You also were one of the most effective evangelists at the time, because you set out on a journey to tell anyone who would hear, guards, the warden himself, inmates, you were like, you want to hear my testimony?
Yep.
And they had no.
No choice. I'm like, come here.
And you did. You would go out into the big yard and you would corner people,
Yep.
and you would tell them this unbelievable, powerful story of God's redemptive power in your life.
And then when I found out what a life verse was, and I had my life verse, I used to write that on my finger right here, and
Yes,
I'd walk
you
around like, yo,
did.
you know what that is?
Romans
Like, yo, know what
8:31.
that is?
Romans
I would tell
8:31.
everybody, yeah. I
If
would be
God
like,
is for you,
who can be against you? Yep.
You started to read the Bible on your own. You started to journal. You started to write as I was writing.
Mm-hmm.
You were, in my mind, when Jesus talks about coming to him, faith, you must come like a child. not childish,
No, I understand.
childlike. You were childlike. You wanted to learn more. You were already, as you said earlier, an avid reader. You read a lot. And now you were wanting to read the books that I had. And it was shaping your faith. And I watched you go from childlike, sincere, and open to very mature very fast, where you began to lead the study and you began to openly testify at church and you began to pray. We would close down the day with prayer at our bed and guys would come and we would get on our knees and you were, I remember being like so proud as I am today to see.
Thank you, Bo.
And here's the point, and you learned this. You don't find God in prison. That was one of the truer things, and your contention against those that were hypocritical. You find yourself lost, and God finds you.
Yeah.
And that's the moment that you recognize, wait a second, he found me in my lostness and the journey in faith by his grace alone. A lot happened in that time. You had a great impact on my walk. I know I had a great impact on your walk. We were inseparable. We were the weight stackers as our occupation in jail. And I'll never forget this. We were in the big yard. There was about 100 and some guys out there. And I don't know where you were this day. You were probably in the weight pit. And I was called to the gate. And pretty big deal to be called to the gate. A million reasons why you don't want to get called to the gate. And I get called to the gate, but it's not just by the guard or our detail officer. It was the warden himself. Mind you, the warden who, when you first started your prison journey, was probably a petty officer, no?
Yeah, absolutely.
So as you're going through the prison system as an inmate, he's going through the corrections career
through the ranks,
as an officer and then a sergeant and then a lieutenant. Now he's the warden. Warden Kennedy, Captain Kennedy, Warden Kennedy. And it's him. And he's out in the yard and he's got a lieutenant with him, a sergeant with him, and other officers. He's got his entourage. And he yells, "Yo, Maddie." Called me Maddie. I stop. I turn around. He says, "Come over here." So now I'm like, what the heck? You don't want the inmates to hear the warden.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I walk over. There's that line you're not allowed to cross. I stand at the line. I have my hands behind my back. "Yes, sir." And he's talking loud and proud, John. He don't care who's listening. He's not whispering. He says to me this: "I just wanted to thank you for the work that you're doing with Little John." You want to know what's funny? Because I'm a former pro soccer player. I was a coach, and I would be training little kids and little Johnny. And then after the practice, mom and dad would come up to me and say, "Coach Matt, we just want to thank you for the work that you're doing with little Johnny here." Now I'm an inmate of the state, and the warden is saying, "I want to thank you for the work that you're doing with Little John." And then he proceeded to tell me why. He said, "I want to let you know," and he's cursing, "that these," and he's cursing, "these bleepers," pointing to his own guards, these guys and those bleepers out there, if they knew who that guy really was, they wouldn't even look him in the eyes. And I'm stunned. And several things came across my mind. One, the warden just gave you the affirmation, and what he was saying to me about you, John, was this: I know that guy, and that guy's present looks nothing like that guy's past. And the Bible calls that transformation. Transformation is from the inside out. The other thing that dawned upon me was how powerful your life and testimony could be, because people know you as that mob enforcer. There's your picture on the screen. A life of crime and fear and pain. And God had a divine appointment for you to save your life. You wrote a devotional called "How God Moved My Ashtray."
Yeah.
In its simplest terms, you wrote your journey. You wrote in the moment. You wrote what it was like to come to the Lord, how to pray, how to study. And I think this book right here that you authored was so sincere. It tells how the Lord got your life. And ultimately, I think the title is just profound, how God can take anyone's heart, our ashtrays, and move them to convince us that he is real. So that's not the only book you wrote. I'm also holding a book that's called From Crime to Christ. I'm not selling the books. We care less about this. But it tells your story And how you wrote this one, John, the subtitle asks the question, could I have saved me? So you're using actual factual experiences in your life, but then in the middle of that experience, you pause and you talk about a guy that kept visiting you, convincing you, don't do that. If you do that, it's going to come with a lot of pain, a lot of consequence. And as you're making your way through, this guy keeps visiting you and he looks just like you and you can't figure it out. And at the very end, there's a wrestling match, a fight, and you find out it's you. It saved you, who was coming to appeal to you, saying, don't do it. It's going to come with a lot of consequence.
Right. God has a plan for you.
God has a plan for you. And I think it's really creative. It could be a movie. Like, and you finally, you end, the last chapter is that guy died.
Don't give away the story.
That guy died.
Yes.
The old you, and that's a Bible verse. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, they are a new creation. Old things have passed away. They're dead. Behold, all things become new.
Yes.
And that is what made you new. So take us, literally, you come to the Lord. There's other stories along the way. We probably can record a whole nother podcast.
Oh my God, we could tell so many stories about confirmations.
Yep.
How I was baptized in the bathroom during the Super Bowl with toilet bowl water.
Okay, let's go. You wanted to get baptized.
Yes,
you knew
I
that
wanted
the
to be
scriptures talked
baptized.
about being baptized.
And remember, we had to call up and find out if you were able to do it.
I remember. Yeah, we
called
wanted to
your
do it right.
mom,
We
yeah.
wanted to make sure we were handling it with care. But I remember when we made the decision, we went to the bathroom. There was a couple witnesses there.
Yep.
And I used a cup and water, and I baptized you
Yep.
in the
Right
bathroom.
then and there.
And I thought it was so awesome because it represented your desire to want to serve the Lord from that day forward. We were with each other for the next 2 years, pretty much. And then you get transferred.
Well, no, don't remember I got sent to the hole for having that razor one time.
Oh, yeah.
Because remember, I used to sit and cut magazines, like make like little collages or whatever, just, and then they did a shakedown.
Yeah, you weren't supposed to have the razor,
Yeah.
but you weren't using it as other people would use it.
Yeah, I was using it really to seriously do like little arts and crafts stuff because when I was bored.
They shook us down. There were cell phones on the unit. They tore our place apart. They
found
find a
the
razor on you.
But then what they do is they don't come and get me right away. They waited till like 4 o'clock in the morning
Yes.
when everybody was asleep.
They don't do that.
No, they did it because they thought I was going to act up,
They usually lock you up immediately. They waited. They woke you up in the middle of the night. I thought it was a nightmare. I wake up and they're actually calling you. They didn't come down to get you. John, Paladino, come to the gate. And I'm watching through the night and my heart's beating 1,000,000 miles an hour. And they ask you to put your hands through the gate. And I heard the
Yeah, then they took me down to the hole and they came and talked to me and all them. And they're like, we know that you don't need that as a weapon. Like, you know what I mean? Like, look at you. But if we would have found it in-house, we could have just said, okay.
Right.
But it was SOG that came.
It was
remember?
SOG, right.
So, and they're like an outside policing entity that comes in. So when they find it, they had no choice but to follow through and they sent me to the hole. So I went to the hole for like 7 days and it was like being on a,
honeymoon.
no, it was like being, I felt like being, at that time I knew who Paul was and
That's
how
what I'm
he was an
saying.
evangelist. I'm like, I was there preaching out of a
That's
cell.
what I'm saying. It was like a honeymoon with the Lord.
Yeah.
Here you are. You're preaching to all these young gangsters who are.
But meanwhile, you can't see anybody because everybody's on the right-hand side is all cells going down. And what happened was the first couple of days, I wasn't saying anything. I was just being quiet. But I started hearing people tell stories about me. So they're like, yo, man, this is dude, man, Little John, man. I seen this guy bite the head off of a rat. Like they're telling like these craziest stories, right? Finally, I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm here. I'm Little John. I'm right here.
Wow.
Yeah. And we started talking. They're like, what? You're here? Blah, blah. And then I was able to start talking to guys and
You were ministering.
praying at night with them and like, don't lose hope and blah, 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 because a lot of those kids, I was in Yardsville and a lot of those kids, they're doing life sentences. They're 18, 19 years old, doing life. Some of them did stupid stuff, like just did a drive-by shooting and wound up killing an innocent person. And now their life is ruined along with someone else's naturally.
Yep.
But they needed to hear those words in those moments, I believe.
Yeah. You God sent you on a little missions trip.
And then they send me back, and something else that never happens, like even when I first got there, is my
kept
bed
your
was
bed.
still available. So I went straight back after a week, went right back to my bed, and
That doesn't happen.
never happens.
Never happens. God had his hand on your life. There
Yep.
was great favor there. You eventually got out. There's other stories to tell.
Yep.
You're going to tell some of those stories tonight at our Landmark Stories event. Today, talk to us about what you do, where you are. Who are you today?
Okay, so moving forward, I was, released from prison back in 2013. And when I came home, it was also another beautiful moment in my life because I was able to go back to my family and they saw me for the new person that I was also.
First time ever.
Yep. Like my dad was happy. Everybody was happy with my transformation and how I was being just a good person, you know what I mean? And then trying to teach them some of the things that I learned, it was hard at first. My dad was a very impatient person and, I was able to teach him patience and it was just good. It was good for them to see that transformation. I think it gave them a peace in their hearts to know.
Your dad gave me the biggest hug I've ever received when I first met him. He's a burly man, big hands like yourself. And John, he grabbed me and he cried. And he said, thank you for giving my son back to me. And I said, Mr. Paladino, the Lord gave you your son back to you. I wanted your dad to know that the transformation was not, I had nothing to do with it.
Right.
And the Lord had truly changed your heart from the inside out.
Without a doubt.
And that's what I think God gave your family, that gift before your father passed away, to see that his norm was John's in, John's out, when's he going back?
Exactly.
And the first time in your life that you were able to show your father that you were truly different. And I think that meant the world to him, John.
Yes, it meant the world to me too. And now moving forward in my life, I used to work in the city building the high rises. And then one day I was on a job and a guy said to me, he goes, you're really good, like with the guys, with the crews I was running and how I deal with people and handle people. He goes, you'd be a great trainer. And I didn't know what he meant at first, because we didn't have to have all the credentials we have today, the industry recognized credentials. But what he was telling me was to become an OSHA trainer.
Right.
And then he gave me the info and I went back to work for like maybe another year before I even looked into it. And then once I figured out that a pen was a lot lighter than a hammer, I went to Rutgers to school, became a trainer. And then as I was moving forward in my training career, I was still working because it was difficult to find clients because everybody that I worked with already had their credentials. So this was like being a hot dog salesman. I had to wait for someone to come and ask me for a credential, and I was trying my best to get out into the arena of doing it. And then one day, I get a phone call. And the phone call came from, there's a program in the state of New Jersey called the Governor's Reentry Program. And they were putting together a program with all vocational skills, welding, HVAC, electrical, and such. And they wanted an OSHA class. But when they wanted it, that's all they wanted was the OSHA class. So they called me up and said, can I come meet them? I went and met them. And when they met me, they loved me right away, just because of the way I am, talking, and just being like a guy, whatever. But I never divulged to them anything about my past because I didn't want to be judged on any of that stuff. I wanted to be known for me being a businessman and what I could do for you right now. So they took me on, we formed a relationship, and it wasn't until like maybe almost a year into it. Nobody knew who I was. I was quiet like this. Then one day they're having a big get together with this Congresswoman, Cunningham, and there's the head of parole is there. There's like all these big shots from everywhere, from Trenton all the way down. Yeah. And I walk into the room, and now mind you, I'm walking in, nobody knows me. All you hear is, Little John, like 3 people yelling my name. I'm like, oh man. They're like, yo, what are you doing out? Walk, I'm like, oh, guys, what's up? Hey, listen, man, nobody knows anything about me here. Like, keep it down. Wait, welcome home. But yeah. And then they went through their little spiel for the day. And so what I do now is I do all of the OSHA construction trainings that people need to have to be on jobs. So it's all the industry recognized credentials that people need, like forklift classes, OSHA classes, flaggers, scaffolding, all that. But all the guys that I train, here's the little kicker though. Everybody's from prison or drug programs, ex-felons. So it makes me so relatable
That's right.
to be able to teach these guys. And then on top of it, I have my little mission statement is I love the 9 fruits of the Spirit. And so I made a little business card with them on it. And then I write on the whiteboard in my class, the 9 fruits of the Spirit. And then without being too much of a zealot, I just let everybody know, like, try to be better at one of those things today than you were yesterday. And the more that we can be more like that, the more Christ-like we become. And then that becomes infectious around us.
Yeah.
Because people see you being more patient or loving or self-control, and then they want to do the same things. And then when you start to form that and it starts to expand outwardly, now you're changing the whole dynamic of your world around you and the people, and everybody's just better and happier. And
You're taking
yeah,
what the Bible calls the 9. Well, there's 9. It's the fruit of the Spirit,
The fruit of the
right?
Spirit.
And when we're connected to the vine, just like any branch disconnected from the tree cannot produce fruit, you have to be connected to the vine. And you've seen these
Yes.
fruits influence people. And when you
Yes.
want to strive, I want to be more loving today. Okay, it's all right. How do I
Yep.
do that?
Yep.
Joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness,
Yep.
and self-control.
I got the
You
cards
have
right
the
here.
cards. It's one of your ways of taking your occupation and blending it with your vocation.
Yes.
The word vocation is your calling, and you're sharing the love of the Lord along the way. And not only that, you're probably not going to brag about it, but the Lord opened the door. You're sitting in this seat now where your physicality, having surgeries along the way, you can no longer be on the high rises and building, and now you're still doing something you love. You've been experienced enough to know what it takes to work on the site.
Yes.
And you're taking people that have been down and out, who know what it feels like to be behind a wall, and they feel already like they're playing catch up, and they meet you, and you're able to help them get certified, and you're able to teach them life lessons along the way.
Yes.
It's a ministry. You're
Yes.
doing ministry, and you're helping the least of these, or the broken, the people that are overlooked. And I know what it's like. I come from a great family, and when I was even released from prison, I had support systems, but there was still this societal judgment that wanted to see you fail. And while you're bridging that gap, you're working with Governor McGreevey,
Yes.
and you're doing transitional programs, and
Yes.
and you're helping people get their lives back together.
Without a doubt.
It's remarkable, John.
Nope. Thank you.
It's God's blessing upon your life.
Without a doubt.
And if there's anything you want people to know today about either what you're doing or anything that you think will encourage them, what would it be?
So for me, it's one of the things that I find to be the most helpful for myself is to really take the time to be conscious about my thoughts, about my feelings, and about my relationship with God. So I always take the time every day to pray. Before every meal, I don't care where we're sitting, where I'm at, I always take my hat off. I say my prayers. Everybody around me knows that. Like, we'll be in the middle of a conversation. As soon as they see the hat come off, they'll just be quiet for a second. You know what I mean? Like, they'll know, like, oh, he's going to pray. And, sometimes I think that we have to understand this. I believe that a lot of the things I've done, although they brought me to this point to have this testimony, and that's a beautiful thing, I wasted so much of my time in my life in doing those bad things where who knows where I would have been today, but we're not here to think about the possibilities of what things could have been.
Right.
But what I do tell people is this.
The point is made.
I say like this: what were you doing for the last 5 years? You don't have to answer me, but think about it yourself. What were you doing for the last 5 years? Where has it brought you in happiness, in your life, monetary, whatever? Where has it brought you? Now, I'm challenging you for the next 5 years to do it this way. And if you can do it the way that I'm telling you, by believing in this, believing in God, having a
and measure
relationship,
the results.
have a relationship with Jesus, accept him as your Savior, live this better life, but it's not a better life necessarily monetarily.
That's right. That's right.
It's a better life with peace and with
There's-
joy in your heart. Like,
Yes, you're nailing it. There's a hole in the soul, and unless that hole is filled,
Right.
it doesn't matter what you succeed in or accomplish, you're
Right.
still going to be empty.
correct.
Now you're saying you found the missing piece.
Yes.
Your ashtray was moved.
Yeah.
He filled you up. You want to do your best to renew that every day.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to force it upon people, but you want to tell them, here's what you know to be absolute truth.
Right. And to live by the best example that I can put out there.
That's right. That's right.
Now, I do make this admission. I'm not always successful at it.
Right.
There's days when I do fail at certain things. Maybe I failed with my patience today.
That's right.
Maybe I failed with my self-control or I wasn't as faithful as I should have been.
Yeah.
But I don't stick in those moments.
Right.
That's a fleeting thought where I'm like, wait a second, I could change that right now with another thought process that makes it better.
Yeah.
So, okay, I wasn't patient. All right, well, tomorrow, focus on being more patient.
Yeah.
Focus on, I believe that, what I really do believe about the 9 fruits is that because love is the first one at the top, everything else is under that umbrella.
Yeah.
So if you have love in your heart,
Love for the Lord, love
Period.
for others.
everything else falls under that. So
Sure.
you're going to be patient. You're going to have self-control. You're going to be all of those things.
Yeah.
And all we have to do is just have that love in our hearts. And that love comes from our relationship with God.
Yeah.
And to have that peace in our mind, knowing that we're in a safe place always.
Yeah.
And then I have someone to turn to in my times of happiness, despair,
That's right.
anxiety, whatever it may be.
Because if God is for you, finish it,
Who
John.
could be against you?
Yeah, that's the
In
theme.
the Latin, it was saying, if God is lifting you up,
Yeah, who can tear you
could
down?
push you down?
Yeah, yeah.
Nobody.
Yeah.
So if you're being lifted by God, I'm an example of that. You are yourself. We went from disparaging moments in our lives to being lifted to this moment. Bro,
By
we
the
used
Lord.
to talk about this, and look, here we are now. It has come to fruition, all the things we spoke about 10 years ago, longer.
Yeah, that's right.
And for me, I look at that in amazement. I'm like, look at this, man. Like a plan that was made so far ago, there was no time for God. It was just as much as we said it then, it happened right then and there.
That's right.
It took a little time for it to come to fruition because that's his plan. We don't question that. But here we are today having this podcast, and we're doing this, and it's awesome, man.
And wanting to see the same results, lives transformed,
Yes.
the power of a testimony. That's why we're doing this. This is our sit down to hear some of the greater details of your story. And there's so much that we left out.
Yeah.
We could spend days.
Yes.
I think people get the idea.
Right.
It's my privilege to have seen what God did in your life, and knowing your past is now just more or less used to show people you cannot be too far gone.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot be too far down that pit that the Lord can't lift you up
Absolutely.
and put you back on solid ground.
Without a doubt.
That's the power of a story. We use one verse, Psalm 107:2. It says, let the redeemed of the Lord say so. Let those who are redeemed tell people about it. Those who have been redeemed from the hand of the enemy. And your life was in the hand of the enemy. And you didn't know it. You just were ripping and running.
Mm-hmm.
And the Lord knew at a certain time, in a certain place, in a certain way, he was going to meet you where you were, and he was going to change you from the inside out, taking you from the hands of the enemy. And now the goal is to commit our lives to the hands of our God, who can now use us as he sees fit. So
Without a doubt.
it's my great joy, my brother, to have you here.
Thank you.
I'm so excited for tonight. Again, by the time this is posted,
Mhm.
we will have already been through that night.
Yes.
I have been praying for you to have mental clarity and to let the Spirit speak through you, because your story's powerful and people need to hear it. The world needs to hear it. There's a lot of hopelessness out there. There's a lot of desperation. There's a lot of darkness. There's a lot of chaos, confusion, and division. And people need to know there's a God who loves them. Loved them how much? Gave them his only son. And whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life.
John 3:16.
And that's what we live by. So final thoughts?
Final thoughts are, usually you save the best for last, but you had me come on first. It's okay. No, but I'm honored and privileged to be here, Matt. You know that we've always spoke about these things, and I really am humbled by this experience. Moving into this, I was a little apprehensive only for the reasons of not wanting to glorify anything that I've ever done bad.
Right.
I have I have mixed feelings for those things. Like, you know, to say like I'm filled with remorse or any of that. I don't really have those guilt feelings because they've been lifted from me. I feel clean and
we've talked about this. I want to make sure our listeners understand, because this is very deep thought.
Yes.
And when you're in prison, you have plenty of time to have deep thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
You have remorse over what you've done. You don't have any regrets because you cannot change what has been done.
Correct.
To regret is to go backwards and try to relive it. I wish I didn't do it. It's a waste of time. And people live in regret, and they're in prison to regret. But to have remorse is go, man, how did I do that? I mean, that's what I think about.
Yeah.
What type of state of mind was I in
Right.
to do what I did? But then the Lord humbles me and says, I want to reach you with my grace.
Mm-hmm.
So his grace kind of comes upon us and gives us forgiveness. So I think I'm hearing your heart, because we talked about it off camera, that line, don't want to glorify who you were, but it's part of your identity and journey.
Yes.
And to be able to say, this is who I was. I was a bad person. I did some terrible things, and the Lord got me, which means he can save anyone. And this is what I want you to get from it.
Yes.
I think that's clear. I think I live in that same tension.
Yes.
Right? Remorse, moving forward. People ask me all the time, if you can go back and change what you did, would you? Of course, but I can't. Therefore, I can't entertain going back there.
Absolutely.
And the Lord allowed it because I am who I am today by the grace of God.
Yeah.
And I say that to you too. I'm greatly encouraged by you. I am proud of you. I look forward to seeing what the Lord is going to continue to do through you. I would love to see you in more settings like this, because you have a story to tell. And you are very articulate, John. You are very eloquent. And may the Lord be glorified through your life and your family.
Right. That's what I pray for all the time. I'm
know you
like,
do.
God, just give me the opportunity to glorify you and for what you've done in my life. And that's one of my biggest things that I want to do. Give back, help people, and, you know, just live a nice, peaceful, good life, man.
You're doing it.
No, thank you, Matt. I
You're
love
doing
you,
it.
man.
I love you too, man. It's a wrap.